He walked a hungry old woman safely home through darkness. Her beautiful granddaughter was waiting, and so was his destiny.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The moon hung low over the dusty town of Copper Springs, casting silver shadows across the empty main street. Most decent folks had turned in hours ago, leaving only the faint glow of oil lamps in scattered windows and the distant howl of coyotes singing to the night sky. Caleb Morgan sat on the porch of the boarding house, his weathered boots propped against the railing, his hat pulled low over his tired eyes. At 24 years old, he had seen more of the world than most men twice his age, driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, mending fences in territories that did not even have proper names yet, and sleeping under more stars than he could ever count. Tonight, he could not sleep. Something restless stirred in his chest, a loneliness he had grown accustomed to but never quite accepted. He was about to head inside when movement caught his eye. A small figure shuffled down the boardwalk, moving slowly, unsteadily. Caleb straightened, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver at his hip before he realized it was only an old woman. Hunched beneath a threadbare shawl, clutching a wicker basket against her chest. She moved with the careful determination of someone who had known hardship but refused to surrender to it. Her white hair caught the moonlight like spun silver, and even from this distance, Caleb could see how thin she was, how fragile. What in the world was she doing out here at this hour? He watched as she paused. Before the general store, her hand reaching toward the locked door. She stood there for a long moment, her shoulders falling with what looked like despair. Then she turned and began walking again, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie and the darkness grew thick and dangerous. Caleb was on his feet before he made the conscious decision to move. He grabbed high, hat, and stepped down from the porch, his boots making soft sounds on the packed earth as he followed her. She did not hear him approach until he was almost beside her. When she turned, her eyes went wide with fear, and she stumbled backward, nearly falling. Caleb caught her arm gently, steadying her. "Easy now, ma'am," he said softly, releasing her as soon as she had her footing. "I did not mean, and to frighten you." She stared up at him, her eyes the faded blue of summer sky at twilight. Despite the lines that carved her face like the canyons of the desert, he could see that she had once been beautiful. There was dignity in her bearing, a quiet strength that hardship had not managed to break. "I am not looking for trouble," she said, her voice thin but steady. "Just leave me be. No tea." "Rubble here," Caleb assured her. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "I could not help but notice you walking alone at this hour. These streets are not safe after dark, especially for a lady." She studied him for a long moment, and something in her expression softened. "You are the young man staying at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. I have seen you from my window." Caleb nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Caleb Morgan is my name. I have been working the Carter Ranch these past few weeks." "I am Alma Whitmore," she said quietly, "and I appreciate your concern, Mr. Morgan, but I will be fine." But she would not be fine. Caleb could see that plainly. He could see the way her hands trembled, the way she kept glancing toward the dark road that led out of town. He could see the empty basket she carried, and suddenly he understood. "You came looking for food," he said gently. It was not a question. Her chin lifted with wounded pride. "I had hoped the store might still be open. I did not realize the hour had grown so late." "Where do you live, Mrs. Whitmore?" She hesitated, then pointed toward the darkness beyond town. "There is a small house about 2 miles past the old Miller H. homestead. My husband built it himself 40 years ago. I have lived there alone since he passed. 2 miles, across open prairie, in the dead of night, with nothing but darkness and whatever creatures lurked within it." and she was planning to make that journey alone, hungry, with nothing to show for her trip to town. "That is a far walk," Caleb said carefully. "Especially at this hour. I have made it many times before." "I'm sure you have, ma'am. But tonight, you will not make it alone." Her eyes met his, searching for something in his face. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because some of the tension left her shoulders. "You do not have to trouble yourself with an old woman, Mr. Morgan. I am sure you have better things to do with your evening." Caleb smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through his chest. "Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, I cannot think of a single thing I would rather do than see you home safely. Now, before we set out, we need to fill that basket of yours." He walked her back toward the center of town, matching his long stride to her slower pace. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. When they reached the small restaurant that stood across from the saloon, Caleb knocked on the door until a light appeared in the window above. The owner, a portly man named Samuel Hayes, appeared at the door in his nightclothes, irritation plain on his face. But when Caleb explained the situation, pressing several coins into the man's palm, Samuel's expression changed. He disappeared inside and returned moments later with a wrapped bundle that smelled of fresh bread, roasted meat, and something sweet. "For the lady," Samuel said gruffly, but his eyes were kind. When Caleb tried to hand the food to Alma, she shook her head. "I cannot pay for this. I came to town because I thought I might trade some of my preserves for supplies, but I realized too late that I had forgotten to bring them. It is a gift. Mrs. Whitmore, please." For a moment, he thought she might refuse, but hunger and practicality won over pride, and she accepted the bundle with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are a kind young man." They walked together through the sleeping town and out into the open prairie. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the path, and Caleb kept his eyes on the shadows, alert to an danger. But the night was peaceful, filled only with the sound of their footsteps and the soft symphony of insects. As they walked, Alma began to talk. She told him about her husband, a man named Thomas, who had brought her west from Virginia nearly half a century ago. She spoke of the children they had raised, 2 sons and a daughter, all of whom had grown and scattered to the winds. She spoke of the grandchildren she rarely saw, the friends who had passed on, the life that had once been so full and had slowly grown empty. "My granddaughter came to live with me 3 months ago," Alma said, and something in her voice changed. "After her mother passed, God rest her soul. She is a sweet girl, but she works too hard. She has taken a position at the Carter Ranch, cooking and cleaning for tea. She sends most of her wages to her brothers back east." Caleb's heart stuttered. "The Carter Ranch?" "Yes." "Do you know her?" "Her name is Sarah. Sarah Collins." He knew her. Of course he knew her. She was the girl with the chestnut hair and the quiet smile, the one who served meals in the bunkhouse and never met his eyes for longer than a heartbeat. She was the girl he watched for macro. Cess, the yard, the one whose laughter made his chest ache with a longing he could not name. She was the girl he thought about every night before he fell asleep, the girl he dreamed about, the girl he had been too much of a coward to speak to, beyond polite pleasantries. "I know her," he managed. She is a fine woman." Alma smiled, and in the moonlight, Caleb could see the resemblance. The same gentle eyes, the same quiet grace. "She worries about me," Alma said. "She did not want me to go to town tonight, but I am too stubborn for my own good. I did not want her to know how low our supplies had gotten. She gives me everything she earns, and still it is barely enough." Caleb said nothing, but his mind was racing. Sarah. Sweet, hard-working Sarah, who served meals with tired eyes and Dee never complained. who was pouring every penny she had into caring for her grandmother, while her own clothes grew threadbare and her own dreams grew distant. The house appeared from the darkness like a memory. It was small but well built, the kind of home a man made for the woman he loved. Flowers grew in boxes beneath the windows, and a lamp burned in the front room, its glow warm and welcoming. The door flew open before they reached the porch, and Sarah appeared in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face tight with worry. "Grandma!" She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around the old woman. "I have been so worried. I woke up and you were gone and I thought, 'Hush now, child, I am fine.'" Alma patted her granddaughter's cheek. "This young man found me in town. ND brought me home safely." Sarah lifted her eyes, and for the first time she truly looked at Caleb. Recognition dawned in her expression, followed by something he could not quite read. "Mr. Morgan," she said softly, "I did not expect. Thank you. Thank you for bringing her home." "It was my honor," Caleb said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. They stood there in the lamplight, looking at each other, and something passed between them. Something wordless and powerful, like the first stirring of wind before a storm. Alma, watching them both with knowing eyes, smiled to herself. "Come inside, Mr. Morgan. The hour is late, and you cannot walk back to town in the dark. We have a spare room, and I will not take no for an answer." He should have refused. He knew he should have refused. But Sarah was looking at him with those eyes, and his feet carried him forward before his mind could object. Inside, the house was warm and filled with the small treasures of a life well lived. Photographs lined the walls, and handmade quilts draped the furniture. Sarah prepared tea, while Alma settled into a chair by the fire, and Caleb sat across from her, feeling more at home than he had in years. They talked late into the night. Alma shared more stories, and Sarah listened with the patient love of someone who had heard them all before, but never tired of hearing them again. And slowly, cautiously, Caleb began to share stories of his own. He spoke of the mother who had died when he was young, the father who had taught him to ride before he could walk. He spoke of the loneliness of the trail, the ache of having no place to call home. When Alma finally drifted off to sleep in her chair, Sarah walked Caleb to the spare room. They stood in the doorway, closer than they had ever been, the air between them charged with possibility. "Why did you help her?" Sarah asked quietly. Most men would have walked by. Caleb considered the question. "Because she reminded me of someone I loved," he said finally, "and because no one should have to face the darkness alone." Sarah's eyes glistened in the lamplight. "She is all I have left. I would do anything for her." "I know you would. I have seen the way you work, the way you sacrifice." He paused, gathering courage he did not know he possessed. "You should not have to carry this burden alone, Sarah. I do not mind the burden. I mind the loneliness." The words hung between them, fragile and honest. Caleb reached out, his calloused fingers brushing against hers, and neither of them pulled away. "I have watched you," he admitted. "Every day, across the yard, in the kitchen. I have wanted to speak to you for weeks, but I could never find the words. ND, now. Now I think maybe words are not what matters. Maybe what matters is showing up. Maybe what matters is being here." Sarah smiled, and it was like watching the sunrise after a long night of darkness. "Stay," she said softly. "Not just tonight. Stay." He kissed her then, beneath the flickering lamplight, in the home her grandfather had built for love. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise. Rather than passion, the beginning of something rather than the end. In the weeks that followed, Caleb became a fixture at the little house beyond town. He repaired the fence that had fallen into disrepair. He brought supplies from town without being asked. He sat with Alma on the porch in the evenings, listening to her stories and playing cards until the stars came out. And every night, he ked Sarah beneath the wide western sky, their fingers intertwined, their hearts beating in rhythm. When he asked her to marry him 3 months after that first night, she said yes before he finished the question. They married in the spring, in the small church in Copper Springs, with Alma watching from the front pew, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. And when they exchanged their vows, Caleb understood that he had finally found what he had been searching for all those years on the trail. Not a place, a person, a family, a home. Alma lived another 7 years, long enough to hold her first great-grandchild in her arms, long enough to see Sarah's belly swell with a second child, long enough to know that she would not leave her granddaughter Al, one in this world. On the night she passed, peacefully in her sleep with Sarah holding one hand and Caleb holding the other, the moon hung low over the prairie just as it had on that first night. And in the silver light, Caleb could have sworn he saw 2 figures walking together across the distant hills, hand in hand, heading toward a light on the horizon. Thomas had come for his bride at last, and in the little house filled with love and memory, a new generation carried forward, bound together by the simple act of kindness that had started it all. An old woman came out at night for food. A young cowboy took her safely home, and in doing so, he found his own way home at last.